Hello everyone, welcome to the Geoecologist. I am Dr. Krishnanand and you have been watching my videos on various topics of geography, environment and research methodology on my channel, The Geoecologist. If you are new to this channel, consider subscribing our channel, and for the earlier videos, you can go to our playlist section. In today's video on political geography, part of human geography, we are going to discuss certain concepts which are very interesting. The concepts of state, nation, nation-state and also the stateless nations with world examples, and also certain important points which are very important to understand in terms of these conceptualizations and also their subjectivities. But also at the end, we'll leave you with a question. So watch the video till the end and let's learn. So now let's understand these concepts of state, nation, nation-state and also stateless nations. But first thing that we need to always remember while studying these topics is that these topics are interdisciplinary in nature. It means the same topics you would find in political science also, and also in history and also in many other subjects. But when we are talking in geography specifically, we need to be very specific to what we are studying in terms of geographical meanings and connotations. So when we say geographers, we use state and nation differently than many other people in everyday life when they interchangeably tend to use these topics. Sometimes people say state, sometimes they say nation, sometimes they interchangeably use it. But the question is, when we look at them geographically, the concept of space and spatial organization becomes the center part of these concepts. So three fundamental questions are very important if you want to learn these concepts. So the first question is how we organize ourselves, how human beings and human societies organize themselves. Then what is the identity? That is meaning that how do we identify ourselves? Where do we belong? Who we are? So this identity creation is the second question. And then how we interact and live together in this world. So it means if you say whole world is a family, then who are the members of this family? How do they interact? And so many countries, so many places. So what is this spatial organization all about? These are certain topics that we need to talk about whenever we talk about the geographical aspects of state, nation and nation-state. So learn this concept that human society is very importantly looking into two aspects or two attributes, which is tangible and intangible aspects. So what is this tangible and intangible aspect of human society? Tangible is which you can experience, you can locate, you can measure, which is basically having a boundary, an area, having sovereignty, power, law and order and manifestation over the real space, and also it's very objective and clearly defined part of the human society. That's what we say is tangible aspects. But what are the intangible aspects of human society? Remember, feelings, emotions, belongingness, then you have sharing, memories, interconnectedness, symbolism, unity without any particular boundary. And remember, these are intangible because you cannot measure it. They are subjective. They have meanings which are of multiplicit nature. So when we say these two things, then it means there are two components of human society which keeps interacting and overlapping. That's why we say they are multi-layered and they have multi-layered interconnections. Now, why did I talk about this topic here? Because all these concepts of state, nation, nation-state or stateless nations are built over either tangible or intangible aspects of human society. So let's understand in detail that what is a state first. So if you look here, according to Montevideo Convention on Rights and Duties of States, which happened to be in Uruguay in December 26, 1933, it defines the state. So state is an independent sovereign government exercising control over a certain spatially defined area or a boundary, and borders of which are usually clearly defined for national and international recognition. It means it is a very objective way of looking into a particular area where there is a governance, it has a sovereignty over it. So this is what we say is the definition of state. So look into the three dimensions of state. The first dimension is it is tied to territory. So sovereign or state as absolute ruler over territory is very important. So you have to mark your territory with this particular boundary. right? That you are separate and you have this power over this particular area. So it has clear-cut borders, and also it defends and controls its territory with these borders, right? And also the recognition here is in terms of diplomatic recognition, passports, treaties. So if you want to go into this particular area, you need a permission from the government of that particular area. That's where the state has the first dimension of the tying up to the territory. Then you observe the second dimension is having bureaucracy and state's own personnel. It means what? The national bureaucracy is staffed by government personnel. For example, the legal system, the educational system, the hierarchy in the government system that you observe. This is the second dimension of the particular staffed state. And the third dimension is that states monopolize certain functions with its territory. It means the state will have a full power, a full sovereignty over certain functions. For example, state controls legitimate use of force within its territory. Then it controls money at national scale and also makes rules within its territory. For example, law and order rules, regulations, taxes, citizenship, and so many others, and controls much information within its territory. These are the three defined dimensions of a state. So now if you observe further, the state possesses 5 essential elements. Means these are 5 elements or 5 attributes which are must for us to call a particular area a state. What are these 5 elements? Population, territory, government, sovereignty, and organized economy. Remember, these 5 key words are very important. So first is population. Of course, a state cannot be without human institution, and very importantly, population is the most important aspect which needs to be taken care by the state. And remember, where there is homogeneity in people, governance is easier, which you can see in from the world examples. So if you see this world map, you have certain states which are nationally and internationally defined, and if you can see across the continents, right? So what do you observe? It has a particular population which resides there and follows the state norms. Then if you observe, the second is territory. And territory is basically marking that portion of the earth which you are going to rule or you are going to have your sovereignty upon. So without a fixed territory, it would be difficult to conduct the international or external relationships. So it's very important to mark your territory. That is defined by your boundaries, your borders, and that's where it gives you a recognition, an identity. That's why territory is very important. For example, India, USA, Russia, or China may be big countries, but countries as small as San Marino, if you see microstate in Italy, that also is a state, which is a microstate, right? So then if you observe, the third one is the government, of course. And remember, government is very important body of a state because it maintains the functionality of a state, right? So function is like, for example, enforcing the laws, legislation, and also arbitration, or looking into the monopoly and also violence. The fourth point is sovereignty. Now remember, traditional definitions of sovereignty says that state of having highest power, final power, absolute power, having supreme power and authority over the state. And also remember, state is a particular area where a sovereign government rules, right? But if you observe the newer definitions, it has one more dimension added to it. So if you look into Independent International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, which was established in September 2000, it defines the sovereignty in a different way. So according to this commission, the state authorities are responsible for not just exercising power over their citizens, rather than maintaining the functions of protecting the society as well, right? Means the first thing is protection of your citizens, right? The safety of your citizens who are living inside that particular state. It means this is more of a welfare definition. The traditional definition was from a power-centered viewpoint. Now, if you observe types of sovereignty, so you observe titular sovereignty. That means it is about titles in the name of queen, in the name of king, in the name of a person. Then if you observe internal and external sovereignty, it's about the relationship between one state and the other state. If you have a sovereign state, it means the other state cannot dominate over you in terms of any rules or regulation, and you'll have your sovereignty in internal ways and external ways both. Then if you observe legal and political sovereignty in terms of legality, in terms of the constitution, in In terms of the political practices, it's very important. And then if you observe de jure and de facto sovereignty, which you observe here, de jure sovereignty is basically legal right to do something, and de facto is basically that sovereignty which is in fact available in terms of ability, but legal right is not available. And most important is the last one called popular sovereignty, which is people's sovereignty, where people overthrow and they declare themselves independent and they have sovereignty over a given space. People's Republic of China and several other examples if you have in terms of revolutions in the history, American War of Independence or the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution, you'll get several examples of this. So these are various types of sovereignty which you study basically in political science, but we are talking about geographical aspect here, where location, where area, where space matters most. So the last one is organized economy. Again comes to spatial organization component of making of a state. What is important here? That every society must have an economic system and which is very clearly defined, and invariably the state has a responsibility to maintain it, to regulate it, and to look into it in terms of supervision of money, regulation, foreign trade, and every aspect of the organized economic system. These 5 components, which are clear-cut, defined, identified, makes this objective idea of a state definition. Now when we cross over, the second question is, then what is a nation? Is it not the same as state? Is it something different? So nation is something which is very interesting concept, and it goes to intangible category of human society. That is in terms of feelings, in terms of values, in terms of emotions, in terms of belongingness. All these common things will come into the definitions of nation. So let's look into it. That nation as a conceptual entity refers to a group of people who share the sense of common identity. And remember, this common identity could be socio-cultural aspect. For example, if you look who are the French people and what is France all about. So people who are living in France, who are French speakers originally, are called French, and wherever they belong, they identify themselves as French. This is something which is socio-cultural. It means religion, language, political institutions, values, historical experience, cultural traits. This is what makes for a nation, right? It does not have a boundary like a state. That is very important. And further, if you look, the members of a nation recognize common shared belongingness, common identity wherever they go. If you remember the Jewish nation concept, the Jewish culture concept, wherever they go in the world, they always identify themselves as Jewish community. So this sense of shared identity is what makes a nation. So if you observe further, that nation is culturally defined by a group of people, and also people construct nation. It means nation is not. It's there when you feel about it, when you construct it. It is not there defined like a state. It means people have imaginations of nation. It means it's also about mental mapping, mental space, behavioral space, feelings. Right? So that's where we say nations are imagined communities, right? They don't exist, as well as at the same time they may exist. So this imagined basically means that you will never be able to meet all the people of your nation, but you can have a objectivity of meeting all the people of a state, by the way. Isn't it? Then you can count all the people of a state, but can you count all the people of a nation? That's where the difference is between tangible and intangible spaces. So community, if you observe here, is basically in terms of shared identity to make it a nation. So let's identify what is the difference between state and nation then. So state is an independent political entity with fixed geographic boundaries, refers to territory, has a given territory where it has a sovereignty, and remember the rules, norms, population, all the definitions that we studied. And then nation comes here, and in nation what you observe, history, origin, culture, language, traits, behavior, these things matter more, right? It refers to a group of people who doesn't have a defined territory. Right? It may be transcending the boundary of a state as well. Nation can exist in multiple states, it means, isn't it? And remember one more thing, that the consciousness about being in one nation or coming from one nation is what makes a nationhood, right? So a nationality, what you observe, generally has these attributes like common descent, common language, common religion. So for example, if you observe the common language thing, many separate nations such as Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, USA, Canada, they all speak English. Right? So English is something which is dominant everywhere in these. Then if you observe religion basis, so for example, the Arab world. Now remember, Arab world is Arab nation, but it's divided into 17 different states. Right? That's what we observe, that state and nations are in conceptual ways different. Then if you observe the concept of nation state. Now if you look into state and you looked into nation, so what is this combination of the two? It's basically combination, or you can say amalgamation of the two. When the same people who believe in a nation, who feel about a nation, gets their state created, that's when it becomes a nation state. And the best example in context of India and Pakistan, you saw that Pakistan became a nation state on the basis of religion, isn't it? So what you observe, the nation is basically coming from a shared interconnections, but state and nation combined together becomes in terms of governance, in terms of sovereignty based on that nationhood or nationality, right? That's what it is. That nation state is a self-identified area where people of one feeling, one shared identity, one commonality live together. Right. So what you observe, the term nation state implies to geographically coincision of the concepts of nation and state fused together. Clear example of some of the nation states of the world, if you observe: Albania, Armenia, Bangladesh, Lesotho, Malta, Poland, Portugal, Swaziland, Japan, Sweden, Uruguay, Egypt, New Zealand, all of them are nation state. And they have certain ethnic groups which inhabit in terms of population. So population became a criteria, shared interconnections, origin, history becomes an important part, role player in the formation of a nation state, right? And then if you observe further, a nation state is the dominant political entity only in last 400 years, right? Since the advent of colonialism and then further the development of newer countries, if you observe, there comes this nation state concept. And further, if you observe, being a nation state is likely to show the greatest stability. Why it is going to show greatest stability? Because people who share same feelings, if they live in the same state, would not fight much in comparison to a state where people of different nations are living. So if you observe, there are certain more states which are multinational in character. Right? They are state, but people living there in that state are belonging to different nation. They have different national identities. This is more common in certain countries in world today, like Ethiopia, USA, Canada, South Africa, Spain, France, Russia, where multiple nationhood is available in the same state. This is called multinational states, right? And alternatively, a single nation may be dispersed across multiple states, right? As we say that they are part nation state. So this is important terminology to remember, called part nation state as well, right? Which are parted into different territories, different states. As we say the example of Arab nation, they dominate in 17 states. So that's what we observe here. And then comes the next one, that is stateless nations. Now observe, there is nation, but there is no state here. So nations which exist, but they don't have a statehood of themselves. For example, if you observe this map of Europe, remember Andalusians, Catalonians, Octanians, then you have Sardinians, right? Then if you go here, you have Macedonians and several others in Europe. They believe in shared identities, but they do not have a separate state. Then if you observe the Kurdistan that we say, it's divided into different states. Turkey has some portion, Syria has some portion, Iraq and Iran have some portions. So if you observe further, that Kurdistan does not exist as a separate state, but it is definitely in terms of nation that exists. So we say it is a stateless nations. Furthermore, stateless nations, if you observe, it's basically a ethnic group or nation that does not possess a state of its own, but their demand is always there of creating their own state. So what happens? The members of stateless nations may be citizens of a particular country in today's world, but they may not have the feeling of nationality towards that country. They may have the feeling of nationality towards their shared identities, their shared cultural uniquenesses, right? That's why they are also categorized as fourth world nations. Remember the word fourth fourth world nations are related to these stateless nations. Example you see here is Kurdistan, you have Baluchistan, then you have the Basque region here, then you have the Tigray region here. So these are certain examples of the world where you'll find that these are stateless nations that do exist, but they don't have the statehood of their own. So they are recognized by United Nations as the fourth world nations. Also, if you look further, this term called stateless nations was coined by a political scientist, not a geographer, in 1983. And the political scientist is Jacques Leroux. So Jacques Leroux, basically in his book Scotland, A Nation Without a State. So this book was very important. Scotland, A Nation Without a State was peculiar, in which this concept of stateless nations was given to the world. And now we can look into the world map, and you can also look into, in context of India, that India, is it a state or a nation or a nation state? So in the comment box below, let us know that what do you think, India or Aryavart or Bharat or Hindustan? What are the meanings of these words that you always use in everyday life? Are they talking about a state, or are they talking about a nationhood? Are they talking about nation state? So now, when we have discussed the various aspects of the concepts of state, nation, nation state, stateless nations, and several other topics in today's video, in the videos to come, we'll be also talking about the various aspects and configuration of a state, evolution of a state, and several other topics part of political geography. So stay tuned, keep watching and learning, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and also please share these videos with others as well.